I'm so glad to be here to facilitate this masterclass. And there's no other person to present this masterclass to us than Ronit. I'm telling you, Dr. Ronit Lentin. I've known her for a very long time, and she's been a friend of AkiDwA. She's been very supportive of our work in AkiDwA. She is a friend, and I'll just read a short biography about Dr. Ronit. Dr. Ronit Lentin is an Israeli-Irish sociologist and writer of fiction and non-fiction books. Dr. Lentin's area of research expertise focus on racism and immigration in Ireland, the Israeli-Palestinian conflicts, gender and genocide, violence, and feminism. Dr. Lentin was born in Haifa, mandatory Palestine in 1944, and she has lived in Ireland since 1969. She was an associate professor of sociology in Trinity College Dublin until her retirement in 2014. If you want to read all of that biography, please go to the event page, and it's all in there. And we are very happy to have you on this masterclass today, Dr. Ronit Lentin. You're welcome. And thank you, Alan.
Thank you very much. So first of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be in any event pertaining to AkiDwA. I've been with you for a long time, since really the beginning, when I met Salome outside Trinity College on a rainy day. And I think you've achieved an awful lot, and I'm very proud to be one of your friends. Now, Alana, would you like to maybe put the first slide on, which is the title of my talk. I'm going to talk about race, racism, and denial in Ireland. Can you put the slide? Right. So you can change the slide now, and I'll basically want to talk through some concepts, and some of it might be a bit theoretical, but it's all there, and the slides are available for anybody who wants them. Alana can send them. So basically, the latest revelations after George and Kensho was killed by armed Gardaí, that George was shot 6 times, 2 of them on the back, that the Gardaí knew George had mental health problems and chose to treat him as a violent criminal, and that the Garda shot at his family as well, make it clear that many questions need to be asked and answered. And they also make it clear that race was a central factor in the Garda's behavior. Irish far-right group used the demonstration after the killing to push their racist agenda. They claimed various false claims that George had previous conviction, that he was violent towards his girlfriend, that he used a lethal weapon to attack a shop assistants. They were all motivated by racism, and they aimed to incite hatred against racial minorities and migrants. And many commentators said that the murder of George had nothing to do with race. The Gardaí were only doing their job against a dangerous criminal. But I want to argue this is part of an ongoing denial that race is central to social relations in Ireland. And that even when people admit that racism does exist, they refer to individual acts of racism or to bad apples, but they not talk about either race or state racism. In fact, when I started teaching about race and racism in Trinity about 30 years ago, I was faced with the wall of denial. The students argued that Irish people had been colonized and racialized by the British, and therefore they have no power to be racist, which is true that they were colonized, but I was also disbelieved because I was a migrant to Ireland. I've been here 52 years, but I was still not really Irish, and therefore I was not entitled to accuse Irish people of racism. But once you understand how race works, you cannot unknow it. So another slide, I will talk in this talk, can you change, yeah. I'll define race and racism theoretically and politically and try and unpack some of the misconceptions. I suggest that denying race and racism constitutes in itself racist violence, and then I will use the direct provision regime to demonstrate that despite Irish people's history of colonization and racialization, Ireland is a racial state which still disavows race and racism. And I want to encourage you to discuss this with me, and particularly we can talk about the link between gender and racism. I did not include it in my talk because I got a bit caught up with what was happening in Palestine in the last couple of weeks, but I'm very happy to discuss this. So let's change the slide again, and let me start with some definitions of race. According to Alana Lentin, who happens to be my daughter, but she's a very smart race scholar, she said that race is technology for the management of human difference, and the main goal of it is the production, reproduction, and maintenance of white supremacy. Because race continues to have power long after Nazism and apartheid ended, we must actually understand why it was legislated for in the first place. Because race has to be invented and constantly maintained in order to ensure white supremacist regimes such as slavery in the US, colonialism, settler colonialism, and the annihilation of indigenous populations in the colonies in the US, Australia, Latin America, Canada, and elsewhere. In all these colonies, the colonizers attach inferior racial status to Black and brown people before criminalizing them as a group by plantation rules, branding, reservations, segregation, apartheid, ghettos, camps, and so forth. So another slide, according to the Australian theorist of settler colonialism, he calls race the child of colonialism, and it is above all an idea in search of reassurance. It needs to be constantly confirmed and constantly filled with content. The Caribbean British scholar, Stuart Hall, called race as a floating signifier because it's slippery and it's always changing and it's in constant need of maintenance. In a way, it's easier to talk about racism, not about race, but although it did not end with the Holocaust, with apartheid, as I said, racism is not just about individual prejudice, but it's a systemic structure of beliefs, attitudes, ideas, and morals. And it's built on the understanding that the world is racially delineated. So another slide, please. Another race scholar, Alex Wehelia, argues that humans have created race for the benefit of some people and the detriment of other people. And he talks about what he calls racializing assemblages. In fact, his book is difficult, but it's based on African-American feminist theories. And these assemblages construct race not as a biological or cultural classification, but as a set of socio-political processes that discipline humanity into full humans, not quite humans, and non-humans. And this is very, in fact, now another slide, please. Another definition of race by the African-American theorists and prison abolitionists is that racism does not rest on phenotype or appearance or culture, but is actually a state-sanctioned or extra-legal production and exploitation of group difference, differentiated vulnerabilities to premature death. Just stop for a minute and think. Racism creates premature death. And we've seen that very much so during the COVID pandemic, when racialized people have been infected in greater numbers and died in greater numbers. Now, in the next slide, Stuart Hall says that race actually has no meaning. Although it's the inscription of power on the body, it has no meaning as an actual biological or physical distinction that exists in nature. And the biological understanding of race is only one way of constructing racial distinction. Another way could be culture, religion, language, but even sartorial differences in the way people dress, And think here of the hijab. It's a clear example of how people are racialized by the way they wear the hijab. The moment you see a woman in a hijab, you think of her racially inferior. Another slide, please. Patrick Wolf talks about regimes of race. And these are essentially political. And the shift across time, and in every society they're different, but actually the effect is the same. And the constant factor is whiteness, and the overall goal is white supremacy. And it's important to remember, and whiteness is very important, because whiteness is something which society doesn't admit and doesn't acknowledge. But in fact, it's white people who racialize people of color, and we have to remember that. So for the next slide, what all of that has to do with Ireland? And I would suggest that coloniality lies within living memory in Ireland. The British have actually, British colonialism only ended about a century ago, and some would say it still exists in the north of Ireland. Amongst other things, there was the incarceration by the British colonial regime of destitute Irish people during the famine in workhouses and poorhouses. And this was continued with the Irish state incarcerating its own people, unwed mothers and children in Magdalen laundries, mother and baby homes, and industrial schools, and continues today with incarceration of asylum seekers in direct provision centers. So the next slide, please. Basically, the Irish continues to deny that race and racism exist in Ireland. But this actually disavows the colonization of Irish people by the British and their involvement through service in the British Army and in the British colonial administration in the racialization of colonized people elsewhere. Furthermore, very importantly, Ireland considers itself as having been a monoculture before these people, i.e. immigrants, came to Ireland. But in fact, the Irish population was always composed of waves of immigrants. Thinking about the Celts, the Vikings, the Norse Gaels, the Anglo-Normans, and afterwards the Scottish and English settlers, and afterwards the Huguenots, the Italian, the Chinese, the Germans, and Jewish immigrants. So Ireland was never really monocultural. It always was a country of immigrants. Now the next slide, I will talk about what Robbie McVeigh, my co-writer of 2 books about Irish racism, called the specificities of Irish racism. He was the first time to publish on it already in 1992, and he says that there are a few elements to this. First of all, racism was imported from Britain via British newspapers, British TV, but also by returning Irish immigrants. And one example is the Redemptorist priest, John Cray, who was a returned immigrant from France, where he was influenced by French anti-Semitism. And he, in Limerick, initiated what was called the Limerick pogrom, which basically the locals ran against the Jews, and it ended with the decimation of Limerick's Jewish community in 1904. All of them left, most of them left. Secondly, before the arrival of migrants to Ireland, particularly in the 1990s, Irish racism targeted Ireland's own indigenous people, Irish travelers, but also Black Irish people who existed here before, and Irish Jewish people. And thirdly, Irish racism was exported to the Irish diaspora. In the USA, impoverished Irish immigrants who went there during the famine arguably became white. And this is documented in Non Ignatius, how the Irish became white, by siding not with the slave abolitionists, but with the slave owners. The Irish also became white in places such as Australia and Canada, and recently also in Ireland, as McVeigh argues, particularly in the moment when it's not possible anymore to talk of our Irish people only as white people, because there's a significant number of people here who are not white. But recently, whiteness raises its head again. So just to give an example of what's happening in Ireland at the moment, would you like to change the slide again? YARI, Youth Against Racism and Inequality, had conducted research amongst people of color, Black, Asian, and traveler people. And their findings are rather troubling. 91% of Black, Asian, and traveler people experience microaggressions by the Gardaí, and 29% of Black people experience physical assaults by the Gardaí. 35% of people of color or travelers were stopped by the Gardaí, compared with only 19% of white Irish, who are, I think, not 90, but 80% of the population. I made a typing mistake there. 45% said they were humiliated by the Gardaí, and 42% said they were fearful. Only 7% said they were satisfied with the encounter with the Gardaí. Another slide, please. I would add another specificity of Irish racism, which is the racialization of asylum seekers in direct provision. Asylum seekers are dehumanized and racialized, but this is being totally denied by the government, who believe that asylum seekers have a choice about living or not living in direct provision centers. Yes, they have a choice, but if they don't live in direct provision, they get none of the benefits. They also believe direct provision is a benevolent system which allows asylum seekers safety and a place to live. But basically, the experiences of asylum seekers tell a different story. Another slide, please. So initially meant for only 6 months, the direct provision system has been in existence for more than 20 years. Last May, there were 7,700 people housed in 85 DP and emergency accommodation centers. And DP centers are mostly situated in remote locations, and they're operated by for-profit companies. And these companies were paid 1.6 billion euro since the year 2000, which is huge. And I would argue that it makes it into Ireland's asylum industrial complex. The cost have increased recently due to the provision of hotel and B accommodation at 100 euro per bed per night, as opposed to just 35 euro per bed per night in DP centers, because the existing DP centers were full to capacity. And this meant that last year alone, emergency accommodation cost 45 million euro. Now, another slide, although meant just for, sorry, no, not enough, no, I'll just get to it in a minute, but just to say that asylum seekers, although meant for 6 months, asylum seekers on average stay 38 months in direct provision. And many people have stayed for 9 or 10 years. Now the next slide. Because what I want to argue, that Ireland has a very poor history of refugee resettlement. First of all, during the Nazi era, between 1933 and 1946, Ireland, which was neutral at the time, accepted only 60 Jewish refugees. Remember, 6 million Jews were being annihilated by the Nazis. Over the years, various groups of program refugees were accepted. There were Hungarians, Chileans, Vietnamese, Bosnians, and more recently Kosovars and Iraqi and Syrians. Asylum seekers began arriving in the 1990s, and their number has gone up from 39 in 1992 to a peak of 11,600 in 2002, and they've been decreasing ever since, but ebbing and flowing. Interestingly, between 2000 and 2017, about 76 asylum applications have been received. And since 2000, the Republic provided accommodation in direct provision to almost 65,000 applicants. Now, in comparison with Malta, to say that between 2012 and 2014, Ireland was ranked 46 in terms of the number of asylum applications that were received. And in comparison with Malta, which is another EU state, and has a population of just over 400,000, it granted over 3,000 asylum applications between 2012 and 2015. But Ireland, with a population of 4.9 million, recognized only 677 asylum claims. In the provision centers, asylum seekers afford to share rooms with strangers. Families have to share single rooms. Residents share bathrooms and dining facilities. There are insufficient spaces for children and adults, and the food is often unsuitable, insufficient, and very often out of date, served only in meal times, leaving many residents, particularly children, hungry. Importantly, DP centers are not safe for women who are often harassed and sometimes, as your research has shown, forced to engage in prostitution to make ends meet. Because asylum seekers receive a very small weekly allowance, about 30 euro per adult. The centers are also very unsafe for LGBTQ people. And center management and staff are often uncaring and badly trained. And the management are mostly interested in their profit margins. And also, I'm not sure if it's in the next slide or not, but DP centers are sites of deportability. Yes. Basically, they're always in constant danger of deportation. And in the last 3 years, Ireland spent almost 2.2 million euro on deportation flights. Now, the next slide, I would like to argue that, no, this is not the next slide, but anyway, just leave it there. It's, I would like to argue that segregating asylum seekers in DP centers is deeply racialized. Of course, not all asylum seekers are black or brown, yet they all are segregated. And until 2018, they were not allowed to work. They're hidden from public view. And if it wasn't for the work of MASI, the Movement for Asylum Seekers in Ireland, and other organizations such as AkiDwA, nobody would know about their plight. They're controlled by the state and its agents, which are management of private institutions. No, just leave it there, please. And the Irish government basically argues that race is not a factor, that their immigration and asylum policies are rational. But despite of this denial, basically I would argue that immigration and asylum policies are deeply racial. But interestingly, as the Minister for Justice, Michael McDowell, had said in 1998, when he was in a position, that the Irish system of immigration is deeply racist. But he, of course, changed his tune because it was he who initiated the 2004 racist referendum on citizenship. Voters have asked to change the 83-year-old place-based citizenship entitlement to all children born in the island of Ireland and make it into a blood-based entitlement only to children born in Ireland to citizen parents. The referendum was passed by a 79% majority, and as you noted in your video, Salome, myself, and a group of people started CADIC, the Coalition Against Deportation of Irish Children, because those children born to migrant parents were considered, had been citizens before, but they were deported together with the parents. We managed to change things, yes, because people were allowed to stay in Ireland, but the law had been changed, and at the moment, as it stands, the 27th Amendment to the Constitution argues that only children born to citizens or to people entitled to citizenship are entitled to automatic citizenship if they were born in Ireland. Now, if you'd like to change again, I would like to suggest that denial of racism and locating it in the past, such as Nazism or apartheid or Jim Crow, by arguing that the present is post-racial, does not mean that regimes of race do not exist. As Ronit Lentin argues, the insistence on not racist, like in saying I'm not a racist, but continues a long period of denial. The current period during which we witness a deepening and expansion of systemic and state and popular racism against migrants, asylum seekers, undocumented people, indigenous people, Muslim and Black people. And basically, this denial that these are racist in itself constitutes a form of racist violence, and that includes the Irish government denial as well. So to conclude, and if you'd like to change the slide, the policeman who murdered George Floyd in America was found guilty on 3 scores. Many people who partook in the Black Lives Matter demonstrations felt vindicated. However, I would like to suggest that this is the start of the road to eradicate white supremacy, not its end. But to conclude, I would like us to think together how we can begin to dismantle white supremacy in Ireland. And to do this, we need to think beyond individual acts of racism. And we need also to speak beyond the right of the Irish far right, even though these are very worrying. After the indictment of George Floyd's murderers, we need to bring the Gardaí who murdered George in Kensho to trial too. But is this particularly post-racial, supposedly post-racial period, we are in danger of not speaking about race at all, as denial is still rampant. And if very often we are accused, if we talk about race, that we are ourselves fomenting racism. So instead, we should stop denying that race is a factor in Irish political and social life and mobilize against racism and white supremacy. And to do this, we need to recognize that racial superiority and white supremacy affect Ireland just as much as every other state. And these are just some ideas of some suggestions of what we should concentrate on in order to, as anti-racist, in order to try and dismantle white supremacy and racism. So firstly, we have to end direct provision. Now, we've gone some ways towards it. There's been a government white paper, but the white paper is not going far enough. We have to end Ireland's asylum industrial complex and end all deportations. And we have to accommodate asylum seekers in the community and not by NGOs. And this has to be anchored in law, because at the moment it's extra legal. There's only ministerial orders. There's no law about direct provision. Secondly, we have to change from the very foundation Ireland's immigration and asylum policies. Perhaps particularly because of Ireland's international law obligations. Then we have to repeal the 27th Amendment to the Constitution and reverse the racist referendum of citizenship. We saw Ireland was able to reverse or repeal the 8th Amendment on abortion, and abortion was a very serious issue. But I think that the 27th Amendment is something we should start campaigning against. We should change Ireland's policies against about Irish travelers, even though they have been recognized as an ethnic minority, but there are still lots of issues like accommodation, education, health, etc. And finally, we have to recognize the relationship between racialized people and state authorities, including the Gardaí, are still very problematic. And we have to take on board the Yari survey. So the final slide, I just want to remind you and I'm sure you know it yourselves, that Black lives do matter, and Black women's lives do matter. So just leave you with this slide for a minute, and I'm very happy to engage in a conversation. Things in the chat there, but I haven't been able to both read them and talk. So I'm very happy to engage in a conversation with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ronit Lentin. I would say this 1 hour is not enough for this topic.
No, this is not.
Well, we just have to make do with it at the moment.
Yeah.
We have loads of questions already for you. The first one I'll put there is, do you think that the current reporting mechanisms for racism are effective in bringing the issue of racism to light in Ireland?
No, I think that the only mechanism that exists at the moment is through INAR, the Irish Network Against Racism. They're very good what they do, but basically they have very little statutory power to do anything about it. You can report, but this reporting should go directly to state authority who have some power to do something about it. So while I have all the respect for INAR, I don't think that reporting racist incidents or racist crimes to INAR is sufficient.
Thank you for that. Okay, the next question there is, what do you think the biggest misconception about racism and how it can effectively be tackled? What do you think is the biggest misconception about racism and how can it be effectively tackled?
I think the biggest misconception that racism is basically acts of deranged individuals. I mean, there are deranged individuals who are very racist, but basically it's not about bad apples or about individuals, it's about state racism. The state differentiates between various people. Now, I know that there are more and more people of color in Ireland, and I know, and I'm really excited by all the work that people of color have been doing, migrant people of color and travelers. But I think there is still a bias. In research by Ebon Joseph, she's shown in the workplace that people, Black people and people of African descent getting fewer jobs. And I think the ESRI has shown that basically there is still a bias. Now, I've come across in my life, I mean, none of us have gone out much recently, I've come across lots of more people of color doing various jobs, that mostly it would be as doormen, as guardsmen, as the lowly jobs. I mean, today I went to have my hearing tested, and the guy at the door was a person of color, okay. But the audiologist was a white Irish person. And this is typical. I went to print something, and one of the printers was a woman of color. But most staff there were all white people. So we have to really move towards greater equality and actually erase the difference in the way people look, or whether they wear a hijab or not, or whether they, if they're men, if they wear long Muslim robes. Basically, we are all the same. And amongst migrants, there are more people who are educated and highly skilled. Let's recognize the skills. There's a lot of work to do. Now, the government has started an anti-racism committee. And in fact, they asked me to join it, and I said, thank you very much, no, because I don't believe that they're able to make changes. They've not proved themselves up to now. Maybe things will change, but I have very little faith in it, to be honest.
Okay, we're still reading questions that we got before the meeting. Then I will transfer to the ones on the chat. So I have another one there. What do you think is the greatest barrier to engage in Indigenous Irish people on the topic of racism? How do we increase the attendance of this cohort at meetings such as this?
The greatest barrier is denial, and the fact that Irish people still see themselves as victims, even though this is a wealthy country, it's a global north country. Now, lots of people are doing excellent work, don't misunderstand me. Lots of white people, white Irish people, lots of NGOs are doing good work, but I think I would like to see no white NGOs. I'd like to see all the NGOs that deal with this area. No, of course, the white NGOs for other issues like you know, education, with the health. But in this area, all the NGOs should be headed by people who have experienced race and racism. Now, I'm very encouraged by having a senator in the Shanad who is a traveler, but I'd like to see more representation by migrants and racialized people in the political system, in the media. I was very disgusted, for instance, what happened to Hazel too. She wanted to run for the Senate, and they gave her some crazy reason why she couldn't. But in my opinion, it's called misogyny and racism.
Yeah.
You know, she's a very, very able woman. I don't know her personally, but what I saw publicly, she's very able. And in fact, they should be delighted that a woman of color wants to represent them, you know? So I think we have to cross the barrier. I think amongst young people, things are a bit better. Really young people in the teens and the early 20s. I think barriers are breaking there through spending time together. Of course, the pandemic has not helped any of us because we've not been spending time together as such.
Mm.
But, you know, look at you, look at AkiDwA, all the talents, all the energy. And I know that you have been in lots of committees and government things and whatever, but I would like to see you, not you personally, but all of you, in positions of power in society, from commerce to education to politics to the media, everywhere, according to your percentage in the population. I mean, I'm not saying you have to count people, but I want you to be more visible and to lead. I want you to lead anti-racism. I'm a member of an ethnic minority. Okay, I'm a Jewish person, but I'm white and I'm middle class and I'm old, you know, so enough. I've done a lot, but I would like to be led by you.
That's very interesting. Thank you so much, Ronit. The next one there is, how has racism denier prevailed for so long in Ireland? This is a question I wonder as well.
How come it's been denied for such a long time?
Yeah.
Well, you know, if you think of it, the Irish were colonized. The Irish were racialized by the British.
Yeah.
But as I said, the Irish also played a part in British colonization, and they don't like to think of it. Now, frankly, in some situations, it was the only job you could get, to work in the British Army, because there weren't many jobs and Irish people were poor. But when you were in the British Army, you became part of the machine, you know? And in fact, there were Irish soldiers in the British Army in Palestine, where I come from, oppressing the Palestinian people, you know? There were Irish people in trade unions in the United States, in political structures, oppressing Black people. But there were also in the United States some amazing partnership between Irish and Black people. A lot of the Irish music and Black music has, in the States, not in Africa, has common sounds, which is very interesting. But remember that Irish people were not innocent of being part of the white machinery. And therefore, don't think about yourself. Irish exceptionalism is one of the problems, you know. Poor us, but Ireland has not been poor us since the Celtic Tiger, you know. That's my view.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ronit Lentin. To those that have just joined us, thank you very much. And that brings me to the next question here on the chat, which says, with the current development in Ireland, development of hate crime laws and national action plan on racism, do you think the situation will change?
Okay, I'm old, as I said. I've been there, done that. We had the NCCRI in the 1990s, the European Year Against Racism. A lot was done, but a lot was not done. There were equality legislation, yes. But we still have only one law to outlaw racial hatred. This is the Incitement to Hatred Act of 1989, which has not been reviewed, even though minister after minister promised to review it. Now they're saying now they're going to review it, but they're not going to actually take it off the law books. They're going to change it. They're going to amend it. But basically, we need a mechanism which actually outlaws racial crimes. Hate speech is only one form of racial crime. We need, personally, I'm not a great believer in policing and in prisons. But in some cases, in order to those who bring the person who killed George and Kenshel to trial. I mean, at least in the state, they brought the guy the policeman who killed George Floyd to trial. But at the same day as his sentence was announced, another young African-American girl was murdered. So these things go on. There's no one way, but we have to explain to people, constantly explain, that national action plans are not enough. We have to start from the very beginning of education. We have to have visibility of people of color and migrants and travelers at all levels. As I said, I want you not to just stand behind the counter in my bank. I want you to be the bank manager, you know? I want you not to just be the at the door of a shop, but the man who actually does the professional work. Because amongst you, there are people who have huge qualifications. Recognize your qualification. I mean, it's a whole system has to change, and not think, yes, I mean, he's fine, she's black, she's quite clever, but, and there is racial harassment at workplaces, as your research has shown. AkiDwA's research has shown it. Ebon Joseph research, as I said, has shown it very clearly that whiteness is still important. So I don't think there's, I think there's some noises. I mean, there's the Equality Fund, which was announced by the Minister Joe O'Brien, which I think is a good thing. But all these things, like the Equality Fund has a very small budget, and half of this budget is from private sources. Why should the government need private sources to make these programs? You know, it should be normal. You know.
Thank you very much. And I'm just going to skip a few questions and go to this one that's kind of like resonates with what you've just said. This is from Liam. It says, "Thank you, Ronit, for a very educational talk. Could you explain whiteness again, please? How it was imported, if I heard correctly, into Ireland? This suggests whiteness is a much broader concept, not simply a matter of skin color. I would like to hear more on this, as it is not well understood."
How was it imported? I mean, one of the ways that it was imported was by returning Irish immigrants and by people who were influenced by what was happening abroad. Whiteness indeed is not about skin color. It's not about appearance. It's about privilege. And very often people don't, it's like men don't actually understand their privilege. It's not to say that every man is privileged. Some men are less privileged than some women, but basically, when you have privilege, you often don't acknowledge it. You know, I mean, I'm just a guy, I'm just an ordinary white guy, and I'm fine. You know, but no, the moment you are a guy and middle class and white, you have three advantages over people who are not white, middle class, or white. And this privilege should be acknowledged, I think. And people should work with this acknowledgement and also be led by the people who have experienced racism. When Salome told me years ago that when she was pregnant, before the citizenship referendum, she was spat at because she was seen as a migrant woman bringing a black child to Ireland, I was just horrified, you know, absolutely horrified. This is what happens. So these things, and people tell you stories when they go to hospital to have the babies, the nurses speak a bit more slowly to the migrant woman lying in bed. Or if there is a breastfeeding counselor, usually the white women get her. And you know all that. I mean, you know it from experience. This is what happens. And we should stop that because, you know, there's only one world. And it's not these people coming into my world. There's only one world. And at the moment when I'm looking at the complete vaccination apartheid, that some countries, as Salome just said, in Kenya, vaccination is not even started. Why? What's going on? Why are the vaccine, the pharma companies making all the money, and all the money goes to vaccinate white countries? Let's be quite open about that. I have a son-in-law whose mother lives in India. He's from India. And the situation in India is disastrous. And India is not a poor country, but the people there are poor. You know, so we have to think globally. This is not just an issue of bad people. It's a system that makes some people worth more than others on a racially based principle. Does that make sense? I mean, I know I'm sounding very, very pessimistic, but I've been there, done that. I've been working this area for 30 years. And I don't see huge differences. I see young people accepting migrants more. But travelers, who has a traveler friend? I mean, lots of these people who might have an African cool guy as a boyfriend have never met a traveler, apart from passing by a holding site and saying, oh, these people, you know? So we have to cop on, be all human beings, equal human beings.
Thank you, Dr. Ronit. From Lucia there, Dr. Ronit, thank you for your teaching. You said you lack hope in the political racism change. How do you think it can be changed?
Change what? The politics of racism?
Yeah, the lack of hope in the political racism. What do you think can be changed? How do you think it can be changed?
Well, I think we have to all work together, do our thing, and become leaders. You have to become leaders. I don't know, there's no simple answer. You know, I'm not a social policy person. I'm just somebody who analyzes society, looks at what's going on. I think the way to go about it is for all of us to talk to our political representatives, explain that this is no longer acceptable to us, those of us who are white. Now, I'm a migrant, okay, but I've had would you believe it? I got my Irish passport after I got married in Israel by post. It was so easy. I just married an Irish bloke. You got your passport by post, and I came to Ireland with an Irish passport. Now it takes such a long time for people to get Irish citizenship, you know? So I'm very privileged, yes. Therefore, I've always worked to make privilege for other people as well, you know? And I'm very concentrated on Palestine at the moment. As you know, things were very, very, very difficult there. But I think we all have to demand equality. And if you see a situation where somebody is in a position of some power, a person of color or a migrant, compliment them, tell their bosses what a good job they're doing, and you'd like to see more people doing this job, and not accept that people of color, Africans or people from Muslim countries, can only do the unskilled jobs, because they can do much more, you know?
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Two questions posted by two different people, Helen and I think Ronan. It's about the 27th Amendment. Okay, the first one is there any group working on repeal of the 27th Amendment? It is an excellent idea. Repeal would be a significant victory and the campaign would be educational. In the same line, Rona, is anyone working on repealing the 27th Amendment in Ireland?
Not to my knowledge. To my knowledge, it has been said here and there, but there's no campaign like the abortion campaign. But we can get organized. We can start it. AkiDwA can start it. AkiDwA, together with some other organization, maybe led by migrants, can start it. We will support you. We, the anti-racists, will support you. Because I think this is so crucial. You know, according to the Constitution at the moment, all people born on the island of Ireland are part of the nation, but they're not citizens necessarily. How can you be part of the nation without being citizens? You know, to me, it's absolutely absurd. But it also meant that my daughter, when she had a daughter, and my daughter was born in Israel, but she came here as a 5-month-old child, okay? When she had a daughter, she could not give her Irish citizenship because she was not born in Ireland.
Mm.
Her husband, her partner, who came from India, had French citizenship. He called the French embassy. He said, I've just had a daughter. They had a child in England. And the French embassy said to me, of course, sir, you are a French citizen. Your child will be a French citizen. He got his passport by post. So this is the difference between one republic and another, because we had this 27th Amendment. It's a campaign that needs to be done. We need to all start organizing. It's terribly important because we're talking about equality. Now look at the 8th Amendment, we managed. But I've just read in the last few days that despite the success of the 8th Amendment, there are still too many doctors and too many hospitals that do not give abortion to people, to women. And still women go to England to have abortions. So we've not fully succeeded there either. Even though the law has changed, in practice it's not yet there. But here, if the law changes, they could not do any, I'm a doctor that doesn't believe in abortion. Because the law is a law. So we have to start this campaign, and I think AkiDwA is wonderfully placed to start this.
Thank you very much. I agree with you. So many comments there for you, Dr. Ronit. Fabulous presentation, they said. They've enjoyed the masterclass, and then just looking for one last one. Fantastic presentation. That's from Rona as well, and Catherine. All the way greetings. I'm looking for one more question. Okay. Okay. The same-sex marriage is now accepted and taught in primary school. How possible can that be done in relation to equality? That's one. And I'm just going to add one more. Just what we look at that. There was one that I saw that was, okay, what are your opinions on access to justice for the victims of racism? Should there be reparations for victims?
Okay, let's the first question, I think equality should be taught from preschool. I mean, it's obvious if same-sex marriages, which was something so unheard of, Ireland, I mean, conservative Ireland, we passed it and it was won, and it's now a fact. Equality between people of different so-called races, religions, ethnicities should be obvious. So teachers, we should have more primary school teachers who are migrants and people of color. And this is, again, it's difficult because training courses for primary school, for national school teachers are either Catholic or Protestant. And if you're neither, or if you're not particularly religious, it's quite difficult to do that. So I think that should change. Also, the need to know Irish should change because people who've not been educated in Ireland may not know Irish. So we should have teachers of all types, hijab, not hijabbed, black, white, yellow, etc. So children can see, they can have role models who are of different types. The second question, remind me? Oh, okay. Yeah, reparations.
Reparations, yeah.
Of course, but there is the Equality and Human Rights Authority. And there are some cases, according to the equality law, that you can take and you can get reparations, yes. But you have to prove that there was racial discrimination on race, origin, religion, nationality, gender, sexuality. You have to prove that something happened. I don't know personally how successful these cases have been in the last while, but it's not easy. But of course, they should be compensated. If people have been discriminated against because of race or racism, they should of course be compensated. There's no question about it.
Thank you very much. More compliments for you there. Very enlightening presentation, Dr. Lentin. So many challenges, much change needed. Thank you. That's from Logan. And then the last question, sorry that we're going a little bit above time. I'm sure you would agree that this presentation is necessary and welcome. So just the last question there for Dr. It says, Dr. Lentin, would you agree that lack of support and oppression, migrant people can't function mentally, still they have to be resilient all areas of life. What hope do they have raising young children in this current time in Ireland? This is from Ivy.
Yes, I think discrimination and oppression and racism is very disheartening and very demoralizing. And I think when I look at migrant mothers very often in the street with their children, I'm full of admiration because it's difficult. But I think people are resilient and they are managing to not only educate the children with equality and love of life, but also keeping the culture of the homeland alive. Lots of people are making a point about sending the children to Sunday schools to learn the religion of the homeland, the language of the homeland, the songs of the homeland. The women are particularly good at that. They cook the food from the homeland. They sing the songs they heard from their mother. They tell the story of the homeland. I think more than men. Women keep the origin alive. And this is our strength. My two children speak Hebrew, which is my mother tongue. And I still speak to them in Hebrew to this day. So this is great joy. They know some of the songs that I taught them and all the rest of it. I think we need to keep the flame burning and keep remembering that we should not be afraid. We have the right to live here. And I think the most difficult is for women and families living in direct provision. Families that have to share a room very often, the whole family. Just think of it, how hard it is for mother and father to have a normal conjugal life with 2 children or 3 children living in the same room with them, and what it does to the children as well. So that's why we have to end direct provision, because it's anti-family, anti-children, anti-women, and anti-men as well. It's
everything.
Normality. No, anti-normality, anti-normal life. Asylum seekers, after a short period when they should be maybe assessed and maybe some tests or whatever, medical tests, then they should live in the community. Exactly. And it has been calculated by us that it will cost the state less to pay them a job seekers allowance and HAP allowance, housing, and allow them to work, costing them at the moment in direct provision and emergency accommodation. So people should live with us, amongst us, in the community together. And you know, Ireland talks about the housing problem, but there are so many empty houses in Ireland. I think last figure I heard was 180,000 houses of apartments which are standing empty. Let the council do compulsory purchase and house people, both the homeless and the asylum seekers there. There's plenty of housing for everybody, but this is a government of landlords, and they want to make.
Exactly.
We have to fight that. This is all part and parcel of the same thing. Race, gender, class are linked together, and we are all in it together. I'm sorry if I sound very extreme, but I believe that, and I'm too old to.
Yeah, I think it's just the reality. You are a realist. Not as many people, but you are. And somebody on the chat has said it should have been a 5-hour class, presentation, and I definitely agree with that. So that brings me to, we have 2 more questions. I don't know if it's okay to still go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll fly through them. Okay, Stephanie there says thank you very much to everyone, and then she said it's very really interesting presentation and discussion. Do you have any reading recommendations to learn more after this presentation?
Well, there are, of course, books, but the book that I've co-edited with Robbie McVeigh in 2002 is being reissued as an ebook very shortly. So I will share it on my Facebook page and on Twitter, and I'll send it to AkiDwA. And it's not a difficult book, it's not very theoretical. And it has contribution from people from various backgrounds, African, Muslim, etc., travelers. And I think it's a good book. And we did a new introduction at which we brought things up to date. And we actually were very pleased to be asked to reissue it. It's a book from 2002. And the introduction brings it up to 2021. And this is a book that's available, and I think it would be interesting. There are lots of books about racism. Some of them are a bit complicated and theoretical, but Ebon Joseph's book about the labor market is interesting as well. And Ebon does classes about racism, which she publicizes on Twitter, and people are welcome to join it. And finally, in Trinity College, if anybody is going to Trinity, the students have petitioned the provost, the director of the college, to start a Black Studies module, and he has agreed. And a woman has been hired. Her name is Phil Mullen. You may know her. She's a Black Irish woman. Her father was Nigerian, her mother was Irish, and she's going to teach the Black Studies module as from next academic year. And this is fantastic. So things are moving, yes, things are changing, but you are our leaders. Feel high, you're there. So, you know what I mean? So I think we have to be led by you. Because you know what needs to be done. I'm not an expert, I'm just an analyst.
That's right. Agreed. Thank you so much, Doctor. And then the last question there is, why is it often so difficult to recognize and address racial discrimination at workplace?
I don't think it's difficult at all. Like, it's not difficult to recognize sexist discrimination, but people choose to tell you, oh, don't mind him, he's just ignorant. Or, I mean, you know, this is not really racist. It's I'm not a racist, but maybe you're imagining. We know when we actually look. If somebody once asked me, what's the difference between somebody being beaten up in the streets and somebody being beaten up by a racist? Usually, when somebody beats you up who is a racist, they will tell you, "Go back to Africa, you monkey, or whatever." I don't want to repeat bad words. You know when it's racist. You know, the bones may hurt the same if somebody just beats you up because there's a fight. But if they hate you because they're racist, you know that they've been racist. And when somebody discriminates against you, it may be subtle. They may just bypass you and not share with you the stuff from the work or whatever. But you know damn well when it's racist and when it's not racist. And you go to your superior and you complain and you make a case. You first of all think to make a case. Calm down, first of all. First of all, I think the first thing to do is to talk to somebody who is a friend, who is sympathetic, and then write down what you want to say. And then go to your superior and say, this happened on such and such a day, and this happened on such and such a day. I want to make a complaint. It's not difficult to recognize. It's just difficult to make people do something about it, but it's not difficult to recognize. We know when we've been racialized.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Ronit Lentin. I am so glad that I was able to facilitate this masterclass today. And as soon as I heard it was you and the topic, I got very, very excited. I think the excitement actually made me nervous earlier on, and that's very unlike me. And so I will now pass the mic back to AkiDwA. There's a slide to show about the next masterclass. And as you guys would all know, this is to mark AkiDwA's 20th anniversary. I am so glad and that I have been involved with AkiDwA from the very beginning with Salome. AkiDwA is doing a great job for all of you to know. If you haven't followed us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, please do so. The website is there as well. Please do so. You're welcome to donate as well. It's not easy to do this job. And I just want to appreciate everybody that has joined and everybody that is involved with AkiDwA. Thank you so much. I can see the men as well. Thank you so much for all your support. And I can see some of my friends all the way from United Kingdom. They joined as well. Thank you so much for all your support. I will now give it back to
Tina. Thank you, Tina, very much.
Yeah, thank you, Ronit. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Go ahead now.
Thank you. Just to say before people leave, we also have a page on AkiDwA website on how to dismantle racism. So it's the Community Alliance Against Racism, which was actually established on the 21st of March this year when we held our discussion on what we should do in the country about racism. And people felt that it would be good to establish community intervention in address this issue. So we are actually asking people to register as champions. We have a campaign coming up. We have some education and training programs that we are preparing. The coalition at the moment has an organization here. That's the core, the community chats that we are actually asking to join. But this came from individuals. People wanted to develop kind of a community intervention to address racism. And also they don't want people to talk on their behalf. And this is actually how AkiDwA started. Wanted to talk about our own experiences. So please visit our website and register. Also encourage your children, your friends. We really need champions from different parts of the country, but also targeting young people, because we really need to change the narrative. We really need to stop this kind of experiences that we had from the time we established the organization in 2001. Yet we are in 2020 and still talking the same about the same thing. So that's yeah.
Well,
Yes. So about our next session, as you can see, you know, I think Alana played just showed the next session, which will be coming up. So it will be, we were very ambitious. We wanted to have 20 masters for 20 years of you know, of our work. So our next one will be having conversation or engaging men. We've actually been engaging men in our work since 2012. This was because we learned that, you know, our members, most of the women have to negotiate with them, whether it's in terms of access to reproductive health, or, you know, on many other things that we want to engage them on, especially on addressing sexual and gender-based violence. So Caroline will be leading this conversation, but we'll also be joined by 2 other men in the conversation. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alana, I thought you were.
And we just have a very small video for 10 seconds to celebrate AkiDwA's 20th anniversary. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Tina. Thanks, Ronit, and thank you, Alana, for organizing. But thanks, everyone.